There are horror movies that I admire, there are horror movies that I love, and then way, way, way above all of that, there's Scream. The 1996 masterpiece from visionary filmmaker Wes Craven isn't just my favourite horror film, it's my favourite film, full stop. Scream is the reason I fell in love with horror in the first place, and the movie that showed me this genre could be smart, playful, terrifying, and fun all at once. And as much as it's become a referential pop culture phenomenon over the years, being parodied and highlighted so often, I still find myself returning to it, like it's some sort of persistent day-to-day ritual that exists within my life. Every rewatch is like visiting an old friend that just knows how to surprise you, in all the best ways. I think to understand why it matters so much, you sort of have to look into the era that it was born into. By the mid-90s, slashers had burned out. Freddy Krueger was cracking jokes in a slew of below-par films, Michael Myers had been sequelized into oblivion, and Jason Voorhees was just... he existed, okay? Horror was limping along, being mocked by critics and largely ignored by mainstream audiences who believed the genre had nothing left to offer. Scream didn't just revive horror, it completely fucking redefined it. It was a film that gave you a little wink while it was killing people left, right and centre, and you know what, I'm into that. It strikes such a compelling balance of being meta without being smug. It's endlessly rewatchable too, because of how it understands the genre as something that works best while it's both communal and personal. It's the kind of movie you want to shout at while with friends. Scream isn't just some movie that I enjoy, it's a movie that has shaped how I feel about movies, how I look at movies. And that's why this Halloween, I'm finally doing it. I am incredibly nervous, I've been putting off this video for the longest time, ever since I started this channel in fact. But this season, I'm finally talking about and celebrating, in my opinion, the greatest movie ever made. So let's talk about it. By the time we got to the 1990s, horror was in a bit of a rut. The golden age of the slasher film, the one that had given us Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers and Freddy Krueger, had long since lost its edge. Sequels were being thrown out so relentlessly that those icons just weren't scary anymore. They were purely mascot fodder, endlessly recycled for diminishing box office returns. Horror had become a painfully predictable place that was formulaic and, most importantly, boring. If you were a teenager in the 1990s, it first of all probably means that you're not watching this video, but it also means you are more likely to be caught laughing at a slasher movie rather than being scared by one. The genre had become something of a self-parody, and the industry didn't have a realistic answer for how to get it back on track. This is where Scream comes in, and guys, it's genuinely impossible to overstate how big an influence and how big an impact this film had on the subgenre at the time. Kevin Williamson's script has literally rejuvenated this genre from the inside out. Scream looked directly at cliches, overused formulas, and the things that everyone thought they knew about horror and addresses them. Characters discussed the rules of survival, dissecting the tropes in real time with us, and they still found themselves trapped inside the very nightmare they claimed to be so knowledgeable about. It was meta in a way horror had never really seen before, long before the concept of being meta was reduced to a buzzword. It was in on the joke, but don't let it fool you. Get too close and that knife is pretty sharp. Take Randy, the resident film geek, whose obsessive knowledge of horror tropes becomes a source of comedy and tension. His scene where he talks about the rules is funny because it's concepts that we all recognise, but at the same time it's actively challenging those rules and whether or not they hold true. And of course, Wes Craven was the perfect director to bring this franchise to life. He was a horror veteran who had lived through an entire arc of this genre, from Last House on the Left to A Nightmare on Elm Street. He understood the tropes better than most, and he knew how to subvert them without losing that fear factor. Think about the way the film opens. Drew Barrymore, the star that everyone presumed would be the lead, is brutally killed within the first 15 minutes. It's a sequence I talked more about earlier in the week, and it's a direct echo of someone like Janet Leigh in Psycho, but with a glossy 90s sheen. The audiences knew how to read a horror movie by now, and Craven knew this, deciding to rip the rug out from underneath them. What makes Scream's meta approach so endearing is that it doesn't feel like direct mockery. Lesser products often confuse self-awareness with a deep-rooted cynicism, but Scream's jokes never come at the expense of the genre. Instead, they come from a place of love. It was a movie that recognised horror had become stale and had a desire to bring it to life once more. That's the primary reason it landed with audiences. It was telling them that horror movies could still be both surprising and fun, while being able to matter and resonate. And there, in that moment, the slasher genre is reborn. Suddenly it was cool again, it was self-aware, it was relevant, and it had something worth saying without losing sight of the simple joy of a masked killer chasing teenagers. If the early 90s had been a funeral for the slasher antagonist, then Scream was the resurrection. Bloody, clever, and a goddamn thrill ride all at once. Scream is endlessly rewatchable for a multitude of reasons. The cleverness, the cultural timing, and the craftsmanship behind it. If you strip away that meta-commentary and the referential winks, what you're left with is still one of the most tightly constructed slashers ever made. Craven directed the hell out of this, delivering a movie that's both gripping and witty in equal measure. Let's start off with the villain. Ghostface is unlike any other slasher icon that came before. Freddy, Jason, and Michael had all become near-invincible boogeymen that could brush off bullets. Ghostface, by contrast, is a killer in a Halloween costume, and the whole getup looks a little goofy if the light catches the sparkles right. But that's entirely the point. The ordinary nature of the Ghostface killer is what makes him scary. They haven't gone the supernatural route. He's a human who could be anyone, and yet despite the clumsiness displayed in several scenes, he remains terrifying because he feels real. Every scene comes with an edge-of-your-seat unpredictability that makes them thoroughly entertaining. Sidney Prescott is another key to the film's success. As the final girl, she's an evolution of the trope. Sidney's a genre-aware girl who questions horror's tendency to sexualize the heroines. She calls out the double standards and refuses to play into the victim role that this world seems to have written out for her. With all of this, she's still scared, which makes her survival resonate more than the average slasher protagonist. She embodies the balance that defines the movie itself. Smart enough to know the rules, but still human enough to be threatened amidst the danger. Gale Weathers is probably one of the most underrated characters in horror. For all the praise she gets, it still feels as though it's not enough. She begins as a ruthless journalist, who is seemingly more interested in exploiting a tragedy rather than respecting it, but over the course of the film we see cracks in that character. She's tough, ambitious, and opportunistic, but she's also courageous and surprisingly heroic when it counts. That arc is carried heavily by Courtney Cox and gives this film a surprising edge of maturity. And then to contrast the maturity, of course there's Dewey. On paper, he's comic relief, a bumbling small-town deputy who always seems to be a step behind. David Arquette plays him with such sincerity that he becomes part of this film's heart. His awkwardness makes him lovable, and he's a rare example of that comic relief character who doesn't undermine the stakes. Going beyond the characters, the structure of Scream is fantastic as well. It's a whodunit slasher, a film that goads the audience into constantly piling suspicion onto people. The mystery element is fundamental in keeping the suspense alive in those quieter scenes. That in turn rewards repeat viewings because you begin to notice the little details that you maybe missed the first time around. It nails the pacing as well. There's never a wasted moment or a throwaway line. Everything works to either build tension, develop character, or push the mystery forward. Craven balances the quiet, character-driven exchanges with occasional bursts of violence or suspense that creates a rhythm of keeping you hooked from beginning to end. Even at nearly 2 hours, Scream never drags. On the surface, the setting looks like the most ordinary small American town, but the familiarity of Woodsboro is part of the film's power. Horror is happening in the world that you recognise, and maybe even a neighbourhood similar to the one you grew up in. All of these elements come together to create a movie that works on every level. You know, it's one thing to praise Scream for being clever, but that alone isn't what earns it the status of being a classic. The reason I think it works nearly 3 decades later is because it's crafted with so much care. It's a movie that respects everything about itself, the genre it's set in, and the people watching it, the people who care about it. To many, the 90s was a funeral for the slasher subgenre. Then Scream was the resurrection that lifted the lid on that coffin. The success that it brought changed how horror looked, sounded, and marketed itself for many years after. In one swoop, Craven and Williamson gave horror a shot of adrenaline that ripped through an industry, sparking the new wave of slashers that we're still feeling the effects of today. Almost immediately, Hollywood scrambled to bottle that lightning. Within a year, we had I Know What You Did Last Summer, also written by Kevin Williamson and something that I covered last year. Then there was Urban Legend, My Bloody Valentine, and a whole parade of other films that tried to capture the magic. Attractive casts, clever nods to horror tropes, and a slick production style that felt closer to MTV than it did Grindhouse. Not many of them have had the staying power of Scream, but the volume of imitators alone should prove how seismic its impact was. The industry had been labelling horror as dead, and suddenly everyone wanted a piece of this new wave. Marketing changed too. Scream sold itself with trailers and posters that leaned into the mystery and the cool factor of its cast. You had Drew Barrymore's face on the poster, the soundtrack, the dialogue that people wanted to, and still do, quote.
Get another beer, you want one? Yeah, sure. I'll be right back!
Style was one of its main focuses, and that influence crept into so many things that released in the years prior. Then there's the main man himself, Mr. Ghostface. What started as a simple little Halloween costume became one of the most enduring horror icons of all time. Unlike Freddy, Jason, or Michael, Ghostface is an idea, not tied to a single person. He's a persona that could be adopted by anyone, and that flexibility makes him endlessly reusable. Ghostface could stumble, get knocked down, and still be scary as hell. It's no accident that even people who've never seen Scream can recognise that mask instantly. It's as much a cultural symbol to horror fans as a hockey mask or a razor glove. Even with all of the history and the 5 following films that we will discuss at some point in this channel, nothing overshadows the original. The imitators came and went, the mask became a Halloween staple. Scream is the blueprint, the foundation, the movie that not only reanimated the slasher, but showed horror how it could grow up without losing its edge. That's why, nearly 3 decades later, Scream isn't just another classic, it's a turning point. A film that didn't just ride the wave of horror history, but created a whole new one. Okay, look, for all of the analysis, for all of the history, the cultural impact, the thing that matters most to me, more than any other objective matter in reference to Scream, is that it's my favourite movie of all time. Not just my favourite horror movie, it doesn't just have my favourite opening, it is my favourite film ever. And that isn't because it's perfect in some cynical sense. It's the movie that made me fall in love with this stuff. It's the movie that taught me that this genre could be so much more than just body counts and blood and gore. I can still remember bits and pieces about the first time I watched it. There's something electric about that experience, and it's something that I retain a little every time I get to watch this with someone new. Whether it be the way that it balances the scares with the humour, or the way that it treats these characters like real people. Scream is a conversation with the viewer. That is the best way that I can describe it, it's the way that I view it. It acknowledges the horror movies that we've seen before, the rules that we've picked up on, and it uses that collective knowledge to pull the rug out from me and everyone else who watches it. Over the years, Scream has become a movie that I revisit to a constant presence in my life. I mean, you know it, even in the background of my video, it might be dark, but there's been a Ghostface mask there this whole time. Every October, it feels inevitable that I watch this thing at least once. Even outside of this month, it feels inevitable that I will at some stage end up back in Woodsboro for some sort of marathon. It's a ritual that I don't think I could ever get sick of. In fact, if anything, I do think that rewatchability is part of the magic. Every time I put this thing on, I notice something small, maybe insignificant, but it just deepens my love that I have for it. But it's not just the details, it's how it makes me feel. Scream is fun, and I think that's something that most highbrow horror movies forget they can be. Don't get me wrong, I love the bleak slow burn stuff as much as the next guy, but there's just something that's special about a movie that can make you laugh 1 second and gasp in shock the next. To get reflective, in many ways this very channel, everything I do here, owes something to Scream. It showed me that horror is this deep connection between filmmakers and fans. You do get that with other genres, but more so horror for me. It's one that thrives on shared knowledge and a collective joy. And that is the very spirit that I mostly try to capture whenever I'm sitting down to write these things. It's not just analysis for analysis' sake, because there's infinite amounts of videos out there that will do that sort of thing. But it's this sense of community, passion, and celebrating why horror is important to so many people. Scream is ground zero of that passion for me. It's easy to say that a movie is your favourite because it scares you, or it makes you laugh, or it just entertains you. But Scream is all of that and more for me. But it also made me care about the characters, about the genre, and about the art of horror itself. It's a movie that feels timeless because it embraced the tropes of the era and turned them into something new that was worth watching. I unfortunately have zero interest in anything this franchise puts out going forward in solidarity with the boycott with the upcoming 7th film, but I'll always have an unshakable love for this franchise and the films up to that point. For me, Scream is more than a horror film, it's the horror film. The one that shaped me, entertained me, inspired me, and that, regardless of the endless amounts of technical elements that I do love, is why it's always going to have my heart, and it's why I don't think I'll ever truly dismiss it. It honestly sucks to see where the franchise is now. This is something that I deeply love, and it hurts me to see it in the hands of such terrible, terrible people. But unfortunately, that is the world that we live in now, and it's something that I will talk about as we go further into this franchise up to the 6th film. The drama behind it isn't going to diminish my love for this film. I don't think it ever could. But yeah, it is a disappointing place to be in, honestly, with the franchise. But enough of that, let's move on. When you strip it all down, Scream isn't a concept that guarantees success. It came out in a decade where horror was supposedly dead, where slashers were a punchline, and where audiences have just seen it all before. And yet, not only did it work, it redefined the whole damn thing for a new generation. It reminded us that horror could be clever without being smug, self-aware without being cynical. That balance is rare, and it's why nearly 30 years later, we're still here talking about it. But more than its cultural footprint, more than the sequels or the endless Ghostface masks you see everywhere, what keeps Scream alive is the community and the way it makes people feel. The excitement, the laughter, the genuine tension, those things don't age, those things don't fade. You can show this film to someone who wasn't even born when this thing premiered and it still works for them. I'm the perfect example of that. Revisiting Scream for me comes with the constant reminder of why I love horror in the first place. Horror is about connection, whether that be to each other, to the stories we tell, or the thrill of watching something dangerous from the safety of our own homes. Scream gets that, Scream understands that. It's a love letter disguised as a slasher, and in turn, it's a love letter to fans like me. So as we close out on this amazing month once again, all I can think about is the final imagery of this film. As the camera slowly pans out of the marker house, the remaining characters inside bloody and unbroken. It's a perfect metaphor for the genre itself. No matter how many times horror gets written off, dismissed, or declared dead, it always manages to find a way back. I've been Jordan, thank you so much for tuning into all of the content this month, and until next time, I'll be seeing you.